into some.
Sure.
Hey, what's up, football fans? Welcome back to the Extra Point. Super excited to have my good buddy Ryan Baker here today. Ryan, what's going on, man?
Hey, what's up, Phil? Thanks for having me. I'm
Yeah,
excited.
absolutely, man. Well, hey, really, really good to talk to you. I know you and I are a little bit of football gurus. We've done dynasty leagues together. We've done redraft leagues together. We've gone and sat on Sundays together and poured over our DFS lineups. So we've been in the trenches together for a lot of years now, just as friends and as football fans. And super excited to talk a couple different things with you tonight. I think as we were just kind of starting, chit chatting before we started the show here tonight, you were talking a little bit more about strategy, kind of your take on football. So what I'd love to hear from you is, how do you prepare for upcoming, this is a dynasty show, so we're talking about rookies. How do you prepare for an upcoming rookie draft? What's some of your strategies?
Sure. First, I don't know. I can't keep up with guys like you who are studying in April and May. But I did for this podcast get caught up. But typically, I watch the draft. I listen to what everyone's saying about the players. I watch where they go, and if that's going to be a good fit for a new wide receiver or a new running back, and pretty much watch most of the games during the regular season, so I know what teams need filling of what positions, and if a rookie could slot right in there, that I know I'm targeting that rookie, or if someone's going to be the fifth receiver on a team, I'll probably avoid it. So my strategy is really going off of the team and, for instance, the coaching staff, the O line, what teammates they have there, because a quarterback may go to a team that runs the ball all the time, and that's not going to be great. Or, which team is going to be able to coach that quarterback into success, such as Brock Purdy had with the 49ers, let's say, for example. So
Hey,
to me, it's important where people go, uh, more so than what they did in college. And so that's why I tend to wait to look. But now you had piqued my interest into some of these players, and now I'm looking at their combine stats, their hand size, like all this stuff. That's pretty cool. And reading some of your articles, I've just been impressed with your knowledge. So I'm excited to be here and hear what you have to say.
yeah, I appreciate it, man. Well, I'll tell you, Joe Burrow had a pretty small hand size at that combine, and he seems to be pretty good at football. So maybe we look at some other metrics and not focus all on the hand size there. Awesome, man. Look, I think for me, one of the big things that I do in my pre-draft prep is I do look a little bit at their college production, and the real thing that I think about is, have you played? Have you played at a high level? Have you played against top level competition? Because I do think there's some, translation. I know you were sharing with me earlier, you had a chance to listen to yesterday's episode. And, I think if you're talking about, I'll just use Bryce Young as an example, talking about, size and a smaller statured player, right? There's people in the NFL that are saying that Bryce Young, shouldn't be the number one pick. It should be Stroud because of his size. But let me tell you something. This guy played in the SEC against top level competition. He won the Heisman Trophy. He was a player who's played at against pro level, pro ready prospects. So I think there is some translation from college production, but my big draft process is a little bit similar to yours. I am looking at draft capital. What does the NFL say about these rookies? Are you a first round draft pick? Because if you're a GM and you have a first round draft pick, you want that player on the field, right? Are you a second round draft pick? Are you a third round draft pick? And so Brock Purdy, obviously the anomaly, Mr. Irrelevant, who suddenly became very, very relevant. And maybe the Niners, still lose that game to the Eagles if they have Purdy for all four quarters. Maybe they win it, but unfortunately, you're not going to win that game without him, and that's not something we would have said last year after the draft. So my process is NFL draft capital, some of that college translation. What do I see on film? Sometimes you have a player, measurables are pretty the same. Do you just like a guy for wide receivers? Are they silky in their, route running? Do they have great cuts? Do they have a great change of direction? Or are they just kind of that one trick pony, can only take the top off a defense, pure speed guy? So some of those intangibles make a difference for me. One of the questions I've been mulling over lately in my own process, and I would love to ask you is, do you draft based off what your roster needs, or do you really take that best positional, or sorry, that best player available, regardless of his position?
Yeah, that's a great question. In Dynasty, it, I'm definitely going with what I need.
Okay.
And that's because if I'm stacked at wide receiver but there's a great running back there, or sorry, but a great wide receiver and I need a running back, I'm going for the running back because I need to fill that. If I know that I have my starting receivers set, I'm looking at what I want build because a lot of people, and I heard Goose say this, oh, I'll just trade it away. Good luck.
Right.
Because I guarantee if there's a league of 10 guys or 12 guys, half those guys won't trade, period. They
Good
just
point.
don't trade because they overvalue their players. So I never would draft a player assuming I will trade them. I draft the player assuming they're going to stick with me. And if I don't need a receiver, I'm not getting a receiver, unless it's whoever I'm trying to
Generational
think
talent.
like Jerry Rice. I'm just trying to
Right.
think like the best, the goat. And but even coming out of college, no one knew that. So I'm taking who I need because I can't rely on the league to trade me. There are a few people in my leagues like yourself who offer fair trades, but those people are few and far between. It's not common.
And you bring up a good point, because I think there's a lot of regardless of, I know this is a dynasty show we're talking about here, but regardless of format, you bring up that point of people overvalue their players and get really attached, right?
Yeah,
And I'll be the first one to tell you, I've been guilty of that, right? I've had that season where I've had Michael Gallup, is a great
yeah,
player that comes to mind. Like, this is the week that he's going to break out. He's going to do, and he's 6 for 54, and he gets 7 points, and you're disappointed, right? You're upset,
right.
and then it's like next week, and then you finally, what happens? You finally bench him, and
Yeah,
that's the week that he goes for 108 and a touchdown, and you're going, oh my gosh, what did I just do, right? So I think the interesting thing for me about trading is you just have to look at players of what are they going to be now, and in dynasty, when it comes to the rookies, what are you drafting them to be? What's their ceiling?
hmm,
And so for this next kind of topic I want to talk about, it's interesting because you and I we've traded players in season. But when would you think it would be a good idea to trade a rookie draft pick? When would you maybe trade up in a draft, down in a draft? What are some of your strategies when it comes to pre-season draft pick trading?
it's a great question. And again, it kind of depends on who's in your league. If people are willing to trade, for instance, I'd be willing to trade my draft pick if I got someone great in return. I'm a bigger fan of a second or third year player than a rookie, even if this rookie's gonna potentially be a star, because most of the time it's a gamble. And if I know that, let's say Kenneth Walker, somebody will trade me Kenneth Walker. I doubt they would, but if they wanted to, I would take him in a heartbeat, knowing I've seen him play in the NFL level. He translates. And there's people, on in this year's draft that, Bijan should be a fine NFL player. Is he going to be Derrick Henry level? I don't know, but so I would trade anytime, to answer your question. What I don't think people are willing to do is trade for the unknown. And so I think a lot of people want to wait, stick to their guns, wait and see how the draft plays out, and then kind of trade. And I guess when I say draft, I mean NFL draft.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting when you look at pre NFL draft, post NFL draft, even though the rookies haven't stepped on the field, right?
Mhm.
Know where they are, the scheme, you have a better sense of who their quarterback, or if they're a quarterback, who the receivers, right? Their supporting cast might be. But I think you have an interesting take, Ryan, because I think there's a lot of people who are probably thinking more along the lines that you think with, hey, you know what? I've seen this player once, or for 2 or for 3 years, and I have a sense of what he can do. I'd rather, value that player knowing what I probably can get versus, like you said, the unknown, right? Because these rookies, right, we look at hit rates, and this is why, we talked about our pre-draft process, and I said my process is to look and see some of the college stuff because it does translate, but draft capital. Because on paper, you may have a player who has all the measurables. Let's talk about a big bodied wide receiver, right? 6'3, 215, 220. Don't you want that on your team as a wide receiver? I want that
Yeah.
on my team. But if the NFL says that this player was a fourth, fifth round pick, is that guy really going to see the field? So
Right.
yeah, at that point, and that player is probably not going in the first 2 rounds of your rookie dynasty draft anyway. But if you're in like our league, we're in a 3-round draft, but I'm in a different dynasty league. It's a 5-round draft. So that player that imaginary player I just mentioned might actually be a player in the fourth, fifth round.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I guarantee there will be a player in that fourth or fifth round that will be a fantasy star
Yep.
in the next year or two. Like that's just how it plays out. You don't know who it's going to be, if it's going to be your first rounder, second rounder, third rounder. And that's why people like yourself who are educated with these rookies have a leg up on people like myself who are just starting to kind of study some of them, where you may know this guy's big, fast. I've seen him break so many tackles, where I'm kind of reading what other people are saying about him, where I didn't really watch him as much because I watch more NFL. But I think there is value in getting a few guys in the second, third, fourth round of those dynasty drafts and waiting to see how everything goes in the preseason. And I look back at Justin Herbert. I didn't know much about him. I watched him in the preseason and was like, this guy is incredible. Like the accuracy on him was unreal and the poise. And so you ask about when to trade, it's like I would be stubborn about players for that weren't a rookie, but I'd be quick to trade away a rookie and then get angry later if I, trade away Gibbs before the season even starts to you and he has 1,500 rushing yards,
Totally.
and then
Totally.
so
Yeah,
there's a lot to think about.
there is, right? And I think one of the things that has to come into your thought process as an owner, a dynasty manager, right, is what do you really value from a safety standpoint, right? There are people that can live with volatility and they can live with risk and they can say, and sometimes you have to take that step back, right, and say, look, my team is not built to win now. Right. This is not your redraft league where, you can, grab Patrick Mahomes and stack him with Kelsey. And you're like, hey, I could probably just grab a couple other guys, but I'm
Yeah.
probably going to make the playoffs just because of those two players alone. Right. This is dynasty where you may look at your roster and say, hey, I had Tom Brady last year. Well, he's retiring. Or, hey, I have
Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers, who's an aging quarterback who, gosh, may only be in the league another 1 or 2 years anyway. Right. Maybe it's time for me to get younger. Or maybe it's time for me to say, look, I don't think I can really win the championship this season, but I have Joe Burrow and he's my only real commodity. Do you
Yeah.
want to play Joe Burrow? Of course not. But if you could go and swap Joe Burrow for 3 players and some future draft capital,
That's a great point. I mean,
that's a
that's
trade you
to
make.
my point, those people weren't making trades at the end of the season. They should have been doing that. I didn't see a lot of that happening where I personally traded away probably too many draft picks because I was trying to build my team to win now.
Yeah.
Um, and it didn't work out last year, but next year it's going to work out. No, I don't know, but it's
On paper, it looks good. I've seen
I
your team. It's
I
nice.
think people at the end of the season kind of are like, I'm out, and they don't think for the next year. They need to be positioning themselves to get a couple draft picks, which is what I think you were doing. You were trying to trade. You were recently, you know, thinking of options, and people need to be doing that in a dynasty league for sure. You bring up a great point that I'd be willing to sell some older people to get these younger people to build up. And I've done that in baseball before. And I watched a guy in baseball literally just sell all of his veterans for rookies. And it takes a while in baseball, but now this guy's in first place, just dominating because he had all these young guys that turned into stars. And you could do that in football too.
I think you just take a dynasty league and you try as much. I think why people like dynasty is you try to mirror what's happening in the NFL. At some point, every NFL franchise is trying to get younger at every position. Now they have, a different, bank of players to fill. We're talking about fantasy, so it's the skill position players, right? We're not worried about an offensive lineman or a defensive tackle, but you're also looking at a win now situation. So in dynasty, right? Travis Kelce still is the best wide receiver in the league. Is he the best long-term fit in a dynasty team? Probably not long-term. For the next 2 or 3 years, I think Kelce probably has 2 or 3 more years of dominance, assuming no injuries with Patrick Mahomes. But there was people last year and the year before who were, especially 2 years ago when he came out, that said, look, Kyle Pitts is, maybe the 101, right?
Yeah.
Because we know that the tight end position is so scarce, right? You have Kelce, you have Andrews, you have Kittle, and then it's kind of fill in the blank, right? Pitts is supposed to be that guy, but look, hasn't translated for him yet. He hasn't really broken out. Atlanta's kind of a disaster as a team, but
Right.
on paper, what we're doing exactly right now is what people all over the country were doing, which was saying, okay, how do I get into that top 2 or 3 of that dynasty draft? Because I have a chance to get Pitts. And then you're saying, look, I've got positional dominance. I would maybe look at trading, some future rookie picks. So someone, I know you probably have to pay a little bit more for Kelce, right? But maybe pick some guys and say, look, my team can win now.
Mm-hmm.
Do I mortgage a second and a second and third round pick? Or sorry, two first round picks and just kind of keep my second and third round picks to try to invest into a Travis Kelce to make sure I can have a chance to win the championship. And I think that's an interesting draft strategy or trade strategy as well. So speaking of youth, because we could spend all day talking about trades, but speaking of youth, let's dive in on some of these rookies. And I want to spend some time with you. I know you've done some research. I also know that you have the 103 in a dynasty league that we're in, so I'll reference that. If you've got some other low picks in your other dynasty leagues, maybe they'll help influence the answer. Or the question I'm going to ask you is, let's talk quarterbacks, man. Let's do it. Everybody's the sexy position. They're the big stars. Tell me how you see these quarterbacks, as far as the NFL clearly sees a big four. How do you see these quarterbacks and kind of what do you project for their futures in the league?
Sure. I think that's pretty accurate. The big four, I think it drops off after that. And I kind of did a look back at, because I remember the drafts thinking, let's say the top 5 quarterbacks drafted, usually only 2 of them hit, maybe 3. And a lot of times, like the second one or the third one, they miss the first one sometime. So it's kind of like I'm looking at this year's thinking like, who's going to hit it, who's not. I think with quarterbacks, I like a little bit of a taller quarterback. So Stroud's 6'3". I like that. But Young just is so decorated and talented. And as you kind of said, I can't remember if it was before or during the podcast, like their experience playing at a high level in college versus high level opponents can, he's been there and done that. And so, man, I think for me, the person that I'm passing on is Richardson. And it's only because he could turn out to be a star, or he could be a gadget player. And gadget player drives me crazy in NFL or in fantasy terms. But if he came to my the 49ers or something, I'd welcome him. Like I'd love to have him. But I think for a fantasy team, I want somebody who I know is going to throw for, not know, but hope they could throw for 40 touchdowns versus using him as a gadget. I don't know how he's going to pan out. His passer rating's much lower than some of the other 3-4 quarterbacks there.
Yeah. Which I'll be honest, Ryan, I'm not super surprised to hear you say that answer, because when we talked about trades, you had said, look, I'd rather trade a rookie pick away, get a player that I know I've seen, a Kenneth Walker, maybe a Nick Chubb, right? We'll talk about a Nick Chubb who's been in the league.
I would love to.
Right. So to me, that's the thing with that, volatility and how much can you live with as a dynasty manager, as a fantasy manager in general, but especially in dynasty. I'm a little bit more I'm a little bit more risk averse. So to me, like first of all, I'm a Gator fan. I grew up in Gainesville. So anytime I have a chance to get a Gator on my team, assuming it's the right one and not just to get a guy, right? But, I'm picking behind you at the 104 in our draft. It is a 2 quarterback league. And my quarterback room's okay. I have Lamar Jackson.
Yeah,
I have Russell Wilson, who, gosh, who knows?
can't be any worse.
No, well, you hope not. But but I have Ryan Tannehill, right, as my
Yeah.
QB4, right? I have Jordan Love, who is an unproven rookie. So I might look at the 104. Look, Bijan should be off the board. Stroud and Young should be off the board. So if I'm going to take a quarterback at the 104, my choices really are Richardson or Levis. Honestly, I don't know if I can have a guy from Kentucky who puts mayonnaise in his coffee and eats bananas with the peel on my team. And
Was that who that was? I
that's
saw somebody. I saw that. I didn't know who that was.
he's a weird dude, man. And
I got to move him down now. I had him
yeah,
at
you got to move him
3.
away. Yeah,
I
maybe
had
move
him at
Devin
the
Booker
3
up.
quarterback. Oh man. I did read though he's got the strongest arm in the draft. I
He
write
does.
that in my notes.
He does.
And I looked at his broad jump and his vertical. Yeah, I was impressed.
He's an
That
athlete.
said, I mean he's no Anthony Richardson, so I get it. And you kind of mentioned something, and I learned the hard way in some of my dynasty leagues was I would go way too young and then get frustrated because I'm getting my behind kicked year. Then I end up trading the guys away or dropping them and then so I like to be a little more safe. And so but that sometimes bites me. So it's everyone's it's fun to hit, I'll tell you that much. If you were to
Oh,
draft Anthony Richardson in your spot and he, lands on a team, oh my goodness, it's he could be incredible.
and so I think that's the thing. We were talking a little bit, earlier about the differences between, a redraft league and a dynasty league, right? In redraft league, you're drafting for what they are today.
Right.
Right? Patrick Mahomes is obviously the number one quarterback. Kelsey's the number one, tight end. Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, the number one receiver. You're drafting for what those players are now. In Dynasty, you're not. They're rookies.
Right.
They're all young. And even if they're a little bit older in their age because of the year that they came out of college, right? Or maybe they went to a JUCO and came out later, you're still drafting for what they could be. You're drafting for that ceiling and that potential. And I think that's where a lot of the real strategy in a dynasty draft comes in different than what it is in a redraft league where what the players should be or what they've produced over the last couple of years. So I see the rankings in my personal rankings. I still have Bryce Young at number one. We talked about it with that high level at
Yeah,
Alabama,
me too.
and being that versatile player. And look, the comps are all going to be Kyler Murray comps, right? He's a more intelligent player. He studies film instead of playing Call of Duty till 2 a.m, right? So he's a student of the game. But look, the reality is that the NFL's changing, and the Peyton Mannings and the Tom Brady's and the Ben Roethlisbergers. How many true pocket passers do you really have anymore? The mobile quarterback is, the quarterback of the present.
Like, yeah, Hurts, I mean, was not a great throwing quarterback in the beginning. And then what they did with him last season was incredible because he's an athlete and he's smart and he's talented and
Yep.
he's strong. So, yeah, your points. I mean, Justin Herbert comes to mind as a very rare specimen that can succeed in the NFL without being that mobile. I mean, he's not.
Have you ever seen him run?
I was gonna say he's not super slow,
He can
but
do it.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't think he likes to do it. I don't. I mean,
no,
I just certainly,
not
you
after
saw.
his injury.
Yeah,
That's
you
for
saw the
sure.
rib injury, but like he can do it. It's in.
Yeah,
You watch the games and you say, okay, like it's kind of like Aaron Rodgers. Like won't do it like Aaron Rodgers when he was a lot younger. Like can't. No, he can. He just doesn't want
right.
to. So, but yeah, I mean, look, Jalen Hurts, forget fantasy football for a second. Jalen Hurts took his team to the Super Bowl, and this was a guy that they were like, you know what, Jalen, if you don't do it this year, you're out, and we're going to draft somebody new. He earned his money. So, yeah, I see Young as the number one quarterback. I see Stroud as the two, and then I think for me, it's a little bit of a tier break.
Yeah,
Not for one. I know we're talking about this big four, but I do think it is a little bit of a tier break. I think the two of them are more quote pro ready. I think, Richardson, is my number three quarterback. But I actually want to talk about Will Levis for a second because Will Levis to me is interesting. I do think we talked about draft, where you get drafted. I think there's two schools of thought with Levis. I think there are teams that value him as a day one starter. and see
Yeah.
him as their. Now, obviously, these guys are going to be drafted to be the quote franchise quarterbacks, but I think there are teams that said, you know what, we could use Will Levis, opening day, week one, and he's going to, go through the rookie pains. And then I think there's teams that say, you know what, maybe we give him a year. And I think Richardson, I really don't, unless it's the Colts. And even with the Colts with Gardner Minshew there, I think Richardson sits a year almost guaranteed. What are your thoughts on, Levis and playing right away versus sitting?
A couple things. I agree completely about that tier. I love doing tier when I prepare for my drafts, and there'd be a pretty big gap between the 2 and the 3 quarterback spot. That said, in a 2 quarterback dynasty league like the one we're in, quarterbacks are valued pretty high, so that changes things. So depending on your type of league is depending how I would rank them. But I would say, uh, Richardson, they, I agree that they should not play him this year, and his best case scenario will go to a good team with a good quarterback that can mold him and get in a good coaching uh, team there. And Levis, though, I do believe you nailed it. I think he's going to come in with his size and ability to come in and play immediately, and but he may kind of turn into what was I going to think, Zach, what was his name, Zach, the Jets, or
Zach Wilson?
yeah.
Oh gosh. Oh, he's not gonna when Will Levis listens to the podcast, he's not gonna like
No,
that.
I'm
So
hoping he just doesn't. I think for Zach, he went to a team that wasn't right. He shouldn't have been starting. He
yeah,
he needed some coaching.
yeah,
I think he's got better talent than it actually shows. So that's where it's like it depends where he goes, because they could set him up for failure. But he does seem like, I was saying he's got the strongest arm in the draft. I put a note though, he could be a huge bust or a star. It's good for a team to go after him and risk it. But I also wrote that, he was a freshman and sophomore at Penn State and didn't look super great there.
yeah,
And so he came into his later at Kentucky, but does that translate to the NFL? And my other question for you, who watches more college than me, these Kentucky's not that small of a school, but there's it's not Alabama and it's not Ohio State,
yeah,
and their competition isn't as strong. And so I think there's some schools that I question if he couldn't cut it at Penn State. I mean, he was younger. So I kind of question some of these schools too, if we were to talk about let's say running backs, McBride's from UAB.
yeah.
What does that mean to me? So how do you feel about the school, like Kentucky, for instance?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think it matters. And the reason I say that, you bring up Dwayne McBride, and I know we talked about him yesterday. Dwayne McBride, absolutely on paper, stats are phenomenal. Crazy, like video game Madden style numbers, right? And that's obviously what you want. But here's the thing. UAB plays in, no disrespect, but plays in Conference USA, right?
Mhm.
You're not talking about 5-star recruits. You're not talking about playing in the national championship game. You're talking about probably, you know, winning your league. If you're lucky, you're probably winning 8 games. You're 8-3, and you're going to go to one of those at-large bids to the,
Right.
BCS bowl games. You're not really competing to go to the playoffs, and so I think that makes a difference. To your question, just kind of about Levis. Look, Kentucky's program has improved. I think Mark Stoops is a good coach. I think they've gotten a lot better. They're
The
still.
fact that you know who the coach is blows my mind.
I probably know more than I.
I
This
couldn't
is
say
facts.
for $1 million who wow.
But look. I think the piece for me that's interesting though is, there you're still in the SEC for Kentucky, but it's, yeah, people are always going to say it's a basketball school, right? That's how it's going to be thought of. Football program, unless you win the national championship, like you're still going to be a second tier, SEC program behind the Alabamas and the LSUs and well, Georgia now, right? Like the Georgias. And I think that's the hard part for Levis is you're right. Like he didn't have great success at Penn State, whereas Bryce Young and CJ Stroud were the guys early on in their careers and have been, right? And that's the interesting part about Anthony Richardson is Florida's terrible right now. They're just not a great program. And I think that kind of maybe pulls some of that what you see on film with the inaccuracy, maybe pulls it down a little bit for Richardson. But from an athletic perspective, I mean, he's off the charts. I think he has the highest ceiling of all four of them if he were to achieve his true potential athletically.
Sure.
But, CJ Stroud, you look at that Georgia game, I mean, he lit it up, man. I mean, he was, and look at who he's throwing. He's throwing to JSN, who's arguably the wide receiver one in this class. He was throwing to Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, who were both first round and are very successful rookies in their own right in the NFL this year. So, yeah, it makes a difference. And I think the other pieces, and we talked about, and you said it, are you game ready? And there is that tier break. Whereas, look, are Stroud and Young going to be the first two quarterbacks off the board? Yes. Are they going to have growing pains? Every rookie does.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think they need as much time, to learn and to grow as Levis and Richardson do. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with trades in the NFL draft, right? Who really values these quarterbacks, because you'll see the Cardinals, supposedly 6 teams trying to move up to that number 3 spot. And if you're moving up that high, I mean, you're a Niners fan. You saw when you move up that high, you probably know which quarterback, or at least, whoever's available, you have an idea of who you want to take. So it's interesting when it comes to what will actually unfold. So let's talk about current quarterbacks for just a minute. And I have to ask, because he is right now today the most polarizing figure in the NFL. What do you think about all this Aaron Rodgers stuff, man? Does he stay? Does he go? Is he going to be around on your dynasty roster for more than another season? Like, how does Aaron Rodgers what do you think about him, man?
That's a great question. And I've actually always kind of been a fan of Aaron Rodgers just because he didn't give a F about anything.
That's true.
But he also doesn't seem like he seems like he could not the most friendly person in the world either. But
yeah,
I don't know. I feel like I don't know why that deal hasn't been done yet, why he hasn't gone to New York. It's kind of confusing what's going on there, but he's got to go to New York, right? I don't know.
How does the OBJ? So this is interesting, right? Because as I watched the news this last week, and OBJ comes out and says, I'm going to be going at some point later this week to New York, and there's apparently this big presentation which includes, what Aaron Rodgers' offense is going to look like, and then the literal next day, the guy announces that he's signing with Baltimore.
Yeah.
So do you think that has any effect on Rodgers getting traded? Because he was on that wish list, right? So do you think that has any effect on eventually Rodgers getting there, or do you think that's irrelevant?
My question would be, who did that wish list, though?
Rodgers. So Rodgers had said he wanted Alan Lazard. He wanted Randall.
He publicly said that.
Yeah.
Oh, so you know more than I know about that. I thought that was the writers putting that together.
No, that was him. And then they asked him in a presser, when he came out of the Hobbit hole in the darkness or whatever his his retreat was.
He's been golfing.
Yeah. Well, they asked him, they said, who else would you like to play with? And that's when he said, like, who wouldn't want to play with OBJ?
Yeah.
So
see, I told you before the podcast, I've been focused on baseball for probably the last month or two. So it's kind of like getting me into football's got me all excited now. I didn't know. I saw OBJ went to Baltimore, and I don't know how I feel about that, because Baltimore is an interesting team. Some games throw it, some games they don't. So it's like I don't know that I want to own anybody on Baltimore.
Well, talking to the Lamar Jackson owner, nobody is.
I take it back. That's the one player I would own, because when they do run, he'll run it in. Yeah, Lamar is actually the one player I would want.
No Mark Andrews?
No.
Okay.
No, because I think not for what you would have to pay for him. I think he's great, but I guess in Dynasty, I'm thinking, I like their other guy they got knocking on the door, tight end,
Yeah, likely.
Isaiah Likely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He's a nice player as well. Yeah.
But
So,
I just he he may rush for 4 touchdowns in a game and not throw to like Mark Andrews disappeared a few times,
true.
and that just drives me bonkers.
Yeah. It's the so your take on Andrews is exactly why I will not take a running back on the Buffalo Bills, because they're running back by committee and their running back is their quarterback. So you're not
Exactly.
inside the 5 yard line and you have Devin Singletary or James Cook. Well, I guess Singletary plays for Houston now, but last season
Yeah.
you're not getting that touchdown. Josh Allen is. So
Believe me, I was a Singletary owner. I
uh,
completely know.
you
Man.
felt the pain. You felt the pain. So let me ask you this on Rodgers. We'll kind of come back and finish up
Mhm.
with Rodgers here. What's his dynasty outlook as of today? Regardless, obviously we think he'll be a Jet. Let's just assume for the sake of conversation he is a Jet. What's his dynasty outlook?
Well, let me say that I've been doing some best ball drafts.
Okay.
So, as for the listeners who may not have played best ball, you draft once and your team's set for the whole year, and you don't have to start or bench guys. It does it for you, and you're just set. So, I think you should do one too before the NFL draft, by the way, because you could draft Bryce Young right now without even knowing where he's going, or you could draft Richardson. And so some of the rookies aren't going early because we don't know where they're going. So it's kind of fun. But anyways, Rodgers is going way later than I thought. So people aren't really valuing him even just this year
Yeah.
in a redraft league or in a best ball league. So in a dynasty league, I'd trade him away if I could. If I owned him, I'd trade him and try and get a much younger quarterback because I mean I take that back. Unless you're a big Rodgers fan, if you're
Yeah.
just like, oh, whatever. Do I personally think he could produce? I think he could do very well with the Jets if he goes to the Jets. If he stays with the Packers, I don't know what's going on.
I don't
I
see him. Yeah, I don't see him staying with the Packers. And I think it's interesting you bring up best ball, because best ball is very telling because it gives you a sense of what the fantasy community is feeling, right?
right,
And I usually do my best ball in the summer post NFL draft, but I actually, now that you've given me a thought, I might do a couple. I usually get into, a lot of the like 6 to 12 teams. Six teams in a best ball draft is really, really fun, actually. You still get a pretty competitive roster, but there is some strategy in the later rounds. Not really the purpose of this show, but I think that's interesting to get a take pre-draft of what the community feels. And
right,
my take with Rodgers is the guy said publicly this season that if he didn't get a trade from the Packers, he might just retire.
right.
What happens if he goes to the Jets next year and they don't? And that the expectation will be that they go to the maybe not the Super Bowl, but that they go to the playoffs at a bare minimum. And I think there will be people in certain circles that say, can they compete for the Super Bowl? I don't see it. I just don't see them being a Super Bowl ready team in Aaron Rodgers year one. But what happens if they don't make the play? You're still in a division with the Dolphins and the Bills. You're still going to have to go through the Chiefs and the Bengals to even get to the Super Bowl. So what if it just doesn't go well at all? Does Aaron Rodgers just say, I'm done, and packs it in and just says, that's it? I don't need this. So
I think he's very close at all times of doing that. I mean, he's a smart dude getting hit in the head multiple like it's taxing on you and he doesn't need to play anymore. He's already has a legacy. I think the competitive juices and the wanting to win like Tom Brady did, goes to Tampa Bay and wins with Tampa Bay. It's like if he could do that with the Jets, that'd be great, but I could see him leaving at any time. I'm not investing any time or energy into him in any of my teams, dynasty at least. Redraft, I would maybe have him as a backup based on what I'm seeing in best ball. And that's kind of why I like best ball. You can kind of see what rookies people are valuing and also even the veterans. I do think the Jets could make a push in the playoffs, but not Super Bowl. Like,
yeah,
I mean, they have a great young offense and their defense is decent, but that division and it's not going to happen.
I just think that division is, you know, I still think the Bills win that division, even if Aaron Rodgers is in
Yep.
it. And so I think what you're saying in essence is if the Bills are going to win that division, the Jets, have to beat the Dolphins twice.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you're not even getting in the playoffs unless you're going to have three teams come out of that division for the playoffs, which means that the other divisions are pretty weak. And I just don't see. I mean, look, the AFC South is rebuilding, right? It's probably the worst division in football. I mean, you have the Jaguars who should win that division. The Titans are going to have a rookie quarterback, probably, or they're going to have Tannehill for one last season, right? The Texans, we know we've already talked about, are going to have a rookie quarterback, and so
Yeah.
are the Colts, right?
Yeah.
Or the Colts have Gardner Minshew, while they develop their rookie. So either way, I think it's the Jaguars and no one else from that division. But I think it's tough to get three teams from one division into the playoffs, even if it is Aaron Rodgers. And I didn't do any of that research before the show tonight. I know it's happened, but I couldn't tell you the last time, and probably not recently.
Well,
So
see, I would bump Miami out of it.
yeah.
If me personally, I think Tua is one hit away from retiring, unfortunately. And they are a good team. They surprise me defensively, but I think the Jets, if Rodgers goes, it's more because even if he didn't go and it was but they had a decent quarterback, that team is actually like on the verge of being pretty good in my opinion.
Yeah,
So
which is a
put
shame.
Rodgers in there with everything they've built. It's possible they sneak into the playoffs. But no Super Bowl. I mean, in my opinion,
Which
he's not Tom Brady. He's not gonna to lead them. Speaking of, if Tom Brady went to the Jets, I'd probably bet on the Jets.
And it's a shame, I think, for the Jets because we're talking dynasty here, and we're talking about young players. And look, he took a second round pick in Zach Wilson, and he just hasn't panned out. Now you're saying less than a year removed that you're going to go find, I think, the oldest quarterback in the league. Now, this is Aaron Rodgers, right? But what does that mean for Zach Wilson's long term dynasty value if they do get Aaron Rodgers? Does he sit on the bench this year and then they hope that he develops until Rodgers retires? Do they end up
Right.
trading? I think Aaron Rodgers signing with the Jets. I think Wilson is on. I wrote an article today about quarterbacks. I know you had a chance to read it. I think if Aaron Rodgers signs with the Jets, Zach Wilson becomes the backup, which for your dynasty team, for whoever is the Zach Wilson owner, is bad news because you probably invested a pretty high pick in your rookie draft to get him. He's obviously not going to be the starter unless there's an injury. And you're going to have a Jordan Love 2.0. You're just waiting until
Right.
Rodgers leaves. It could be one season, it could be four. So
Let me pause you right there because what do you think of Jordan Love?
I actually have Jordan Love on my team.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was fortunate enough to grab him off the waiver wire, which we're in a capped quarterback league. Most dynasty leagues are unlimited,
Yeah.
position. We have a cap of 4 quarterbacks on your
So a
roster.
non-starter, it's hard to roster sometimes.
Correct. And so you're basically saying like, okay, if I believe that much in this player, then I have a player who's just taking up a roster spot who I can never play, right? And even though dynasty is different than redraft, you still have to deal with bye weeks and injuries. Like that's still consistent.
Yeah.
Um, I think Jordan Love is basically a 24-year-old rookie. I don't want to hear that he has NFL experience because he's played in meaningless preseason games and pretty meaningless week 17 and 18 games. So call me when it's, week 12 and you have to go to Chicago and it's freezing cold and play the Bears, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a different kind of competition. I think he's gonna have to have. I think if you're the dynasty owner for Love, you need to be patient for 2 reasons. One, the guy's got to get a full season under his belt. 2, look at the team that's around him. I mean, look why Rodgers wants to leave. I mean, you have Christian Watson who had a couple of weeks last year where he was really a boom player.
Right.
The rest of the weeks was pretty average. You don't have Alan Lazard anymore, which look, Alan Lazard's not my favorite player, but at least he's a competent receiver. You're probably going to see the Packers draft a rookie tight end. All the mocks that I've seen have Dalton Kincaid or Michael Mayer from
Yeah.
Notre Dame and Utah going to the Packers, and you have Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon still, so you can run the ball. Sure, Jones is a decent pass catcher, but I think I would not be shocked to see the Packers take an early round tight end and then in the second round add another wide receiver just to give Love, a chance to be successful in year one. But I think he's probably a guy that you're gonna maybe hope for a year two breakout realistically. Temper your expectations, use him as your QB3. Hopefully you don't get any injuries. If you do, you have someone who's at least going to be a starter and you can obviously put him in for bye weeks, but probably not a guy that I'm looking to start, weekly, kind of plug and play.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's I think the listeners would appreciate that because there are probably some people out there that have him, and if I had him, I'd be curious what to do. Do I trade him? Do I keep him? I think being patient is the right advice because it is a good franchise, and if they make some moves, he could be good in a year or two. I mean, not this year, probably,
Yeah.
like you said, but if they could easily build something there.
I
I'm
think
a
he's
big
going to be a
AJ
good
Dillon
player.
fan, so
Yeah,
um, he can catch as well. By the way,
he
um,
can.
they have two pass catching back. I like that duo.
Yeah, I do as well. Look, I think Jordan Love's going to be good. They drafted him to be great. They drafted him to be Aaron Rodgers, successor. And now it seems to be, however, it has worked out differently than probably what they thought. It seems to be the time. So yeah, I think that look, I was excited to get him, put it that way. I mean, I made a trade to move Kenny Pickett off my roster to move up and get another first round pick in this upcoming dynasty draft, rookie draft, because I had more than just one position where I felt like I needed to get better. And so I made that trade. I was able to get the 104 and the 106, and then I was able to get Love, off the waiver wire. So in a sense, I got an extra quarterback out of it.
Yeah,
So
that's solid.
yeah, I think it was a good trade. Ryan, let's end with this. Give me one player that, you feel is maybe it doesn't have to be a quarterback, but one rookie that you're looking at that's maybe a little bit undervalued, maybe a little bit off of people's radars that they maybe know the name, but they don't know a lot about, or they just maybe don't know the name and they should be looking at, and as they prepare for their upcoming rookie drafts.
I knew you were going to ask me this, so I studied, and I came up with one based on a few metrics that I used. But Tank Bigsby of Auburn at running back,
Okay.
he's looking to be maybe between the sixth to ninth running back off the board. So he's not going to be high up there, but he played at Auburn, which good competition. He's 6 foot, 210 pounds. He could catch the ball. I think he comes from a good program, and Auburn's produced some running backs before, and his name's Tank. Uh,
If
but
nothing else, draft him for that. We'll take him alone.
I've seen crazier things than you know going off of names, or I've seen people bet big money on horse racing just because the color of the horses was red or something. It's like whatever. No, Tank, I watched some video on him, and he's not the fastest guy, but he's also not slow, and he's hard to bring down. And that's what I want, somebody who could run between the tackles and who can catch the ball. And he's got all those skills. I wouldn't reach for him, but I think he's somebody that I kind of have on my radar.
Yeah, and that's good, right? Because we were talking earlier about, development of these quarterbacks, and sometimes you need a year. But sometimes true. I mean, I think you have Isaiah Pacheco on your team. I mean, look, the guy was a seventh round pick last year.
Right.
But he was kind of sitting there. I made that joke earlier about Michael Gallup. This is the week. This is the week.
Yeah.
How many fantasy managers, regardless of format, have been waiting for Clyde Edwards-Helaire to become the first round pick that
Right.
Patrick Mahomes said, like, could you pick anyone? Go get Clyde. I mean, Mahomes handpicked this kid, and all he's done is get hurt and
Yeah, I've owned him.
produce. So
But I got Pacheco because no one runs angrier in the league.
you're
He
absolutely right.
finishes plays, and I don't know if Tank does that, by the way. But if he does, I'm gonna like him even more.
My,
But yeah, Pacheco, I got off the waiver wire as well.
yep. And that's the point, right? Like I wrote in my notes last year, and I always write down some notes at the end of season, like things that I want to remember, things that I want to, like take in, because at the end of season when things are fresh is the best time to take your notes, because then you get into the off season and it goes away. And I wrote exactly that note. I wrote exactly that note in my notebook here, right? Isaiah Pacheco runs mad. Runs mad. That's what
He
I read.
really does.
He's a mad dude. And so, but look, that's a seventh round player in the real NFL draft, right? That all of a sudden, you're saying if he has a really productive season, I think they sign him to a longer term deal. If he doesn't, it's a seventh round player that costs the Chiefs nothing, and it's no draft capital to say, okay, we could trade him or cut him,
Yeah.
right? We'll get someone else. So I like your take with Tank Bigsby. I've given him a little bit of research, not a ton. Now I'm going to do a little bit more.
Yeah,
Um,
let me know what you come up with.
I will.
I think the running backs, I don't want to switch and go off on a tangent, but I think the running backs kind of fall off, but they're also a position where there's always a diamond in the rough. So there's going to be one. I mean, all the positions have that, but the running backs, it's there's going to be one of them. And
So
so if somebody listening has like they're a fan of, Tulane and they like Spears, then go for Spear. It's worth getting and sitting and seeing how it plays out.
So my take yesterday with Goose was Marvin Mims. I like Mims out of Oklahoma. I think all the receivers, not all, most of the receivers in this class are pretty small. They're all kind
They
of
really are. There's
lightweight
only like
guys,
three or
short
four that
guys.
were.
Yeah, I mean it's really Johnston from TCU that seems to be one of the bigger bodied receivers that's being talked about as a first round kind of
Mhm.
pick. But a lot of these receivers are pretty small, which look, Devonta Smith, we talked about that yesterday, obviously has Deshaun Jackson made his living, but he was kind of that gadget, take it over the top guy. I'm not a huge fan of smaller receivers, so I'll give a different take today. Everyone in the world knows that Bijan is the best player in this draft. But how many people are really looking at Roschon Johnson, who was his backup at Texas?
Hmm.
So that's my take, because you talk about size, stature. He's a bigger player. He's over that 200-pound mark. He
Yeah.
obviously was overshadowed by a truly better player. But you've seen, like, and I'll use the Dolphins and the Bengals as an example. How many people were saying that T. Higgins and Jalen Waddle wouldn't be able to be wide receiver ones because of Jamar Chase and Tyreek Hill, and both of them were wide receiver ones this season.
Yeah.
So you take that analogy and you say, okay, did Roschon Johnson get overshadowed because he was bad, or because he just truly was, Bijan was just that much better? And I think it's the latter. I think Bijan truly is that much better. Obviously, the guy's being talked about as the number one dynasty pick, and obviously the probably odds on money favorite to be the number one running back selected in this draft. But does Roschon Johnson go to a team where you have a Derrick Henry who's got 2 or 3 more years, and he sits at for the Titans, for example, and then all of a sudden develops and maybe becomes a player? Because in Dynasty, we know that we're not drafting them for what they are today. We're drafting them for what they could be. So
Right. That's a great point. And I think something else that listeners need to do if they're going to take some advice away is what you did at the end of the season. Write your notes, do your rankings, just so you remember. Because I used to get caught up with thinking, oh, I love this player, but then I forgot weeks like 11, 12, 13, they let me down and frustrated me. And I kind of forget that because, it kind of blurs out the end of the year, but writing those notes are extremely helpful. So
yeah,
people need to do that. Even right now, they could go back while it's still more fresh in April than it's going to be in August.
totally. Yeah, and I think you're right, because at the end of the summer, you're going to have all the noise from training camp, and then Hard Knocks is going to come out, and whoever the
Yeah.
team is on Hard Knocks, their players are going to get a boost in the
Yep. Always.
rankings, right? And so that's always kind of a fun time of the year. But once the noise really picks up, you're right, you forget about some of those guys, and you say, "Wow, I'm on the clock in a redraft league in the 11th round."
Yeah.
And I totally forgot that I wanted this player who could be an absolute steal, and Isaiah Pacheco, for example. And all of a sudden, you
Right.
can just take the highest ranked player, which is what a lot of people do. So, Ryan, my buddy, good conversation, man. Awesome to
Yeah.
have
This
you
was
on the
fun.
show. Appreciate you being here tonight, and looking forward to a great summer of best ball. And obviously, we're looking forward to a great fantasy football season coming up, and excited to compete against you in Dynasty again this year, man. I'll be honest, I like your roster. It looks nice. So maybe Maybe it's not. Maybe I don't want to compete against you. No, it's
Nah,
there anyway. So here we go.
I mean, yours is, I'm looking at yours the same way.
We're all right. We're all right.
But
So
yeah, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
awesome, man. Well, good to chat, and appreciate you being with us tonight. And for all the folks at home listening, you have questions for the show, shoot me an email, shoot me a text. Interested in being a guest, let me know. And for everybody who did listen tonight, thanks again for listening to the Extra Point.